The bell over the diner's door gave a tired jingle that sounded like it had learned to be quiet. Emily Dupree paused on the threshold long enough to read the room the way bikers read weather, eyes scanning entrances, exits, faces, hands. The town was called Willow Bend, the kind of place where the mountains sloped down like old shoulders and the only thing newer than the gas pumps was the blue political sign fading behind the counter. She carried the road in with her, dust in the creases of her gloves, the low thrum of a V-twin still buzzing in her bones, and a steadiness that had taken years to grow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. A paper sign had been taped crooked to the pie case, cash only, please, God bless. Someone else had taped another above the booth nearest the window, white ONLY seating. The tape was clear, but the message glowed like a siren inside her skull. It wasn't official. No business license or city council stamp announced it. But 5 men with buzz cuts and red sunburned necks had turned their bodies into a border, and borders write their own rules when nobody pushes back. Emily slid the door closed behind her with a soft click and felt the room tilt toward her. She was tall, not towering, and the leather jacket draped on her frame made her seem even less interested in being seen. The back of the jacket showed a plain black panel, no colors, no patch, because she'd zipped a windbreaker over her cut before rolling into town. On the left wrist of her riding glove, a silver bead bracelet clicked softly when she moved her hand. She had once told a woman she loved that the bracelet helped her keep time with her breathing when rooms like this tried to erase it. "Seat yourself," the waitress said from behind the counter, voice strained into chair like a violin string tuned a bit too tight. She was 50 maybe, hair sprayed into a helmet, eyes flicking between Emily and the men by the window. "I will," Emily said. She chose a stool at the counter where she could angle the mirror behind the pie case into a rear view of the whole room. To her right, a sugar packet caddy overflowed with blue and pink and white, a hopeful mountain. To her left, the men owned a booth and a half, boots propped on the seat across, claiming geometry to shrink everyone else. One of them spoke without moving his gaze from the window. "You lost, sweetheart?" The last word sounded like a rubber mallet, soft surface, hardcore. She didn't look. She let the clean ritual of diner life place its offerings in front of her, a water glass sweating, a laminated menu that had seen more elbows than a hockey rink, a napkin and a cradle of stainless steel, the smell of coffee a shade darker than midnight. The town's silence pressed its nose to the glass of this place and watched. The waitress poured. "Passing through?" "Riding," Emily said. "Started before the sun. Thought this place looked like it remembered eggs." That tugged a breathless laugh out of the waitress before she snapped her gaze toward the booth again as if laughter were contraband. "2 eggs? Bacon? Scramble 'em hard. Grits if you have them. Coffee black." Emily laid her gloves on the counter like a prayer and wrapped her hands around the coffee. Heat threaded her fingers, stitched together a seam inside her chest. She inhaled and felt the coffee tell her everything would be okay, and if not okay, manageable, and if not manageable, survivable. She'd learned on the road that some things talk if you listen right. The men by the window adjusted their posture like a wave changing depth. They were the kind of men who wrinkle toward 40 and pretend they're still 22 by talking loud. One wore a baseball cap with a flag patch where the blue had been replaced by a skull, no stars, only teeth. Another had ink that slithered up his neck and vanished under his jaw like a secret badly kept. They didn't wear a uniform so much as the idea of one. "You deaf, girl?" The man nearest the aisle finally turned, eyes narrowed until they held more suspicion than sight. He nodded at the handwritten sign. "Can you read?" The owner had kept to the kitchen hatch, visible as a pair of anxious hands and a face that gleamed with apologetic sweat. He tried a swallow of courage and made it halfway to her. "Ma'am," he said, voice paper towel thin, "we're, going through a—" "It's okay," Emily said quietly without turning. She wasn't here for him. She wasn't here for them. She was here for the road's simple contract: you go out honest to the wind and you come in honest to yourself. You don't lie to your center and your center doesn't lie to you. Her center, when she checked it now, told her what it always told her: stand when standing matters. Sit with your coffee when sitting matters. And do not let strangers decide which one it is. She spooned grits that had arrived as if by a miracle in a chipped white bowl and tasted the earth that had become them, corn ground to memory, salt like a small wave breaking. She could hear the kitchen's radio low, a gospel station not brave enough to speak its name in here, and each cord braided a rope she could hold. When she finally turned her head, she did it slow. No theater. She set her spoon down with care and met the man's gaze as if he were a person who might still change his mind about what kind of person he wanted to be. I can read. I can also ignore. Your sign doesn't belong to this diner. It belongs to your fear. I don't pay it. He smiled the way a dog sometimes shows gum instead of teeth. You talk like that, you might not leave. Then I'd better finish breakfast, she said, and looked back down. In the mirror, she saw his shoulders lift. Postures are languages. For men like him, the alphabet started with the word crowd. He elbowed his friend, nodded toward the door, toward the sign again, toward her jacket. They were looking for a patch. People always were. The absence of proof made them brave. The waitress returned with bread that had spent a minute too long in the toaster and a side of jam that reminded Emily of long trips west where the sun lay down in red swaths across the asphalt. I'm June, the woman whispered, as if her name was an escape hatch. You all right? I'm thirsty, Emily said, meaning more than water. June refilled the glass until the ice sang and then left it there between them like a promise. Listen here, Cap Hat said, finally standing. The white-only paper fluttered when his thigh brushed the table. This is our place. You understand me? You don't fit the decor. Then it's amazing I matched the chairs, she said, without lifting her head. The chairs were red vinyl tired. They matched nothing but stubbornness. She swallowed coffee and let it hit like a small sun in the back of her throat. Her heart beat in its saddle calmly. Years ago she used to name her fear, made it smaller that way. She'd named it Wasp because it buzzed and darted and stung when she swatted. Wasp hummed at the base of her skull now, but it stayed small because the road had taught her better names: mercy, patience, precision. The man reached the counter and planted his hands on either side of her plate as if claiming the cutting board claimed the food. Stand up, he said. Walk out. Or get carried. She lifted her gaze to him and felt a heaviness settle in her bones, old and not hers. Her mother used to call it the weight of other people's unfinished homework. You sure? She asked. Because I'm trying very hard not to spoil my breakfast. He laughed, but the sound skipped once. He wanted her to stand. He needed her to stand so the story he told himself about who he was could survive. But she was a writer. Writers understand leverage. In some rooms, stillness is a crowbar. Randy, the owner hissed from the kitchen pass-through, leave it. She's a customer. Not my customer, Randy said without looking back. His breath smelled like lacquered whiskey and workplace accidents. June put a hand on the coffee carafe like it was a weapon and found out that it was, not for pouring, but for holding, so her hands wouldn't shake. Emily saw it, the tremor that wanted to be a quake. The diner had become a stage where every prop had to audition for a part in a rescue that might not get cast. A boy sat at the far end with a textbook open, pretending to read the same paragraph for 15 minutes. He had a pencil behind his ear and a fear underneath his ribs. Emily caught his eye for a fraction and gave him the smallest nod that meant, I see you seeing me. He swallowed and placed his pencil on the counter like a flag he didn't know which country claimed. Randy's hand moved to her shoulder. It didn't squeeze exactly. It bracketed. She remembered the training she hated calling training because life shouldn't have to be a classroom for other people's mistakes. She breathed in. She breathed out. She let the coffee slide another half-inch toward her, cleared her throat, and said softly, don't. He squeezed. She felt her muscles wake like a neighborhood at dawn. She stood, but not because he told her to. She stood because some animals you quiet by petting their heads and some you quiet by showing them their reflection. On her feet, she seemed taller than she had a right to be. The jacket unzipped and slid open half an inch. Randy saw black leather underneath, something stitched, a patch's edge. His face changed the way a sky changes when someone opens a door in a storm. You don't know where the wind is coming from, only that it's about to come through. "Those colors," he said, voice lowering as if a priest had walked in. "Those are my prayers," she said. She didn't have to show it all. People imagine what you let them imagine. She could feel the rock-heavy certainty settle where it always did, where people try to put doubt, in the soft between ribs. It hardened. She watched his pupils pulse and narrow, calculating risk, memory, rumor. Outlaws. The word wasn't in his mouth yet, but it was pacing the hallway behind his teeth. "Lady," one of the others called from the booth, "this ain't a town for whatever church you're selling." "Then bless your breakfast," she said, and put 2 crumpled 5s beside her plate. "June, thank you." Her voice did something she couldn't stop. It softened for the woman in a way that made a man like Randy think softness was for sale. "Sit down," he said, and to her surprise, he stepped back. Threats like his don't come with that kind of sudden courtesy unless they've been given a map to a different outcome. He flicked his gaze to his friends. "Boys, you see that?" He tilted his chin toward the sliver of leather she'd allowed to show. "She thinks a sticker makes her tough." Emily smiled and shook her head once. "Not tough. Connected." She took her gloves. "There's a difference." She turned toward the door and watched the reflection in the pie case like it was a second set of eyes God had lent her. Randy's hand moved. "Some men can't let a woman leave upright in a story they called." His fingers reached for her elbow, intending to spin her like a dial. She let her body do the math faster than her brain could say the numbers, pivot off the ball of the left foot, step the right back half a shoe length, shift the elbow inside his wrist, push, not hard, just enough to move the fulcrum and let his own momentum carry him forward into air. He stumbled, hit the edge of the counter, knocked the ketchup bottle into June's apron, and collided with the stool the boy had just vacated. That made the others stand. For men is a weather pattern. They gathered. She could feel June's fear rise up like a rush of steam that fogged the clock over the pass. The owner disappeared and reappeared with a bat that looked like it was more used to convincing raccoons than men. He didn't swing it. He wore it like someone trying on bravery for the first time. "You're leaving," said the tattooed one with his hands spread like a scale deciding a sentence. "Now. And you're not coming back." "I'll leave when my bike finishes cooling," Emily said. "Engines have feelings." Her heart did an inventory of doors. The front swung out into the street. The rear led to a garbage alley and a chain-link fence out to the gravel lot. The third door wasn't a door, just an image, the mirror behind the pies. In it she could see the street. In the street she could see her ride, black paint drinking the morning light, chrome winking, helmet hooked to the sissy bar. It sat at an angle that meant someone had looked at it and decided to move it and then decided not to. Tattoo Net grinned like an animal sniffing heat. "What club is it?" he asked. "Because I collect patches." "Then you're short a life," she said. He laughed too long, turned the sound into a knife and set it on the counter. "You think you're safe because of a thread and a rumor." "I think I'm me," she said. "And that's enough." She glanced at June, who was holding the phone 1 inch off its cradle, hands shaking. June's eyes asked and apologized and begged and promised all at once. Emily gave the smallest nod again and breathed as if the oxygen here were rationed. She heard it before they did. The road spoke to her first because she had trained herself to hear the dialect of distance. A low, braided thunder like a storm that couldn't decide which mountain to climb. Engines. More than one. Coming slow, then slower, then idling in a way that meant respect for something sensitive. The hairs on her forearms felt the tremor and told her what her eyes already knew in the mirror, the line of black and steel nosing up to the curb across from the diner like a river finding its bed. Randy heard it next. He didn't look afraid so much as newly literate, like someone who had learned the alphabet and just realized what the letters could spell. Tattoo Neck's grin tugged itself uncertain. The boy at the end of the counter breathed again, the way a rabbit breathes when the hawk's shadow passes over but doesn't stop. Outside, side stands clicked down like boots forming ranks. The diner's windows vibrated a fraction, just enough to make the napkin dispenser hum. In the mirror, Emily watched the first rider dismount without hurry, pull off a helmet, and shake out gray-streaked hair. Leather patched right, emblems that meant something to the people who knew. A woman at his shoulder swung a leg off and landed with that same shirty riders get when asphalt is an old friend. Behind them, more. Not a crowd, no. A company. Randy swallowed. You called them? If I had, you would have heard the phone, she said. She thought of her bracelet, the beads clicking once when she had laid her gloves down, how time kept itself in little sounds. She hadn't sent a text. She hadn't had to. Riders who move like a tide can sense when one of their own is sitting alone in the wind's lee. The road is a wire if you know how to listen. The door jangled again, more decisive this time, and a draft pushed the smell of fuel and leather through the room like a blessing some would call a curse. The man who stepped in had eyes the color of gravel and a smile that did nothing to soften them. His cut told the story for him, the winged skull, the top rocker, the bottom rocker that had raised court cases and whispers alike for decades. He carried no visible weapon, but he carried the weight of 1,000 miles and the law of the road that says you take care of your own. He looked at Emily first, checked her stance, her breath, the angle of her shoulders, and inclined his head. "Sister," he said, and let the word lay down between them like a bridge. She nodded back. The room changed air the way a lung changes direction. Tattoo Neck blinked. "No," he started, and stopped when the man's eyes moved to him with the precision of a scope's crosshair. Not a threat, a measurement. The kind that tells a carpenter if a beam will hold. More riders filed in, not loud, not grinning, not doing the movie thing where men perform their power like a costume. They spread themselves in the room quietly, along the counter, in the doorway, near the windows, claiming nothing and everything at once. The waitress's hand came off the phone. The boy picked up his pencil. The owner put the bat down almost by accident as if gravity had taken its side. The gravel-eyed man drew a breath. "Breakfast?" he asked June, as if that was why they were here, and maybe it was, partly. "We heard the grits are honest." June blinked and then nodded so fast her hair helmet shivered. "Yes, sir." "Yes. They're hot." Randy found his old smile and tried to put it back on. It didn't fit anymore. "We don't want trouble," he said to the man's vest as if the vest could answer. "Nobody does," the rider said. His gaze fell to the homemade sign above the booth and then to the tape, then back to Randy's hands. "But you put up paper that calls to it." He looked at Emily again. "You all right?" "I am," she said, and knew that she was because her hands had stopped needing to hold anything to keep from shaking. Outside, more engines idled, low as a prayer, stacking themselves into a sound that made the mountains remember they were mountains. A truck slowed, then moved on. A pair of pedestrians chose the other sidewalk and pretended to admire a window that sold bait and wigs. Tattoo Neck cleared his throat. "Listen, man, we were hungry," the rider guessed, one eyebrow raising 1/8 of an inch. "Me too. Let's draw a map where we can all eat and nobody bleeds." He turned to June. "You got a chalkboard?" She pointed at a specials board where Wednesday's meatloaf had been Thursdays and now apparently Saturdays too. The rider took the chalk, turned it in his fingers like a coin, and wrote in block letters that didn't belong to a man who'd left school early, "House rules, all are fed." No signs that disgraced the door. "Respect or remove yourself." Then he underlined it once. Not twice. One line. "Enough." Randy scoffed, but softly, like a kettle cooling. "You think you make the rules?" "I think June runs the kitchen," the rider said, handing her the chalk. "And the kitchen runs the house. You want a vote, buy the building." The boy laughed, a tiny, brave sound. Tattoo Neck shot him a look that promised a memory later. The gravel-eyed rider saw it and turned that measuring gaze on him. "Careful," he said, so mild it took a second to understand the firmness under it. "We're leaving all of us with a chance to become the kind of men we can tell our daughters about. Don't spend yours cheap." Emily tasted something like relief and something like iron. She liked the chalkboard rule for its simplicity the way she liked a good chain for its tensile strength. You don't see it working until it stops something from snapping. She had ridden too long to mistake arrival for victory. The road never ends. It only hands you another mile. Then the back door cracked. A slice of alley light stumbled in. A shape hovered in that wager of brightness and shadow, and for the first time since they'd walked in, the rider's shoulders lifted in a motion you could have mistaken for the start of a shrug if you didn't know what shoulders like theirs keep track of. Emily saw it, a boot at the threshold, not work-worn but soldier-stiff, a gloved hand on the frame, a flash of steel carried not for show but for reach. Randy's face changed in a way that emptied it of his own decisions. He wasn't the wind anymore, he was a windsock. Someone else outside was blowing. Tattoo Neck smiled without humor. Finally, he breathed. June whispered, "Oh God," and crossed herself with the hand that held the coffee pot. The boy's pencil dropped and rolled until it fell into the crack between baseboard and tile where only dust lives. The gravel-eyed rider stepped once, just enough to see the alley with his periphery, and murmured to the room without turning his head, half-step back from the door. "Everyone breathing stays breathing." Emily's heart slowed instead of sped. Senses sharpened. The mirror showed her the alley like a gift. A second figure slid into view, smaller, quicker, with a bat that had nails through its end like a crown of thorns for bad ideas. The first man knocked the door wide with his boot heel. The room inhaled. The sign in chalk seemed to float. Outside, engines deepened their note and fell quiet in unison, the way a choir sometimes stops singing to let the world hear its own pulse. And then the bat rose, the gloved hands tightened, and the back door's frame stuttered in its hinges as the first blow came down. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. And met the door jam instead, wood splintering in a sharp gasp that made the whole room flinch. The nail-studded bat glanced off the frame, sent a spray of paint chips like sleet across the tile, and the man who swung it stumbled a half-pace into the diner's back hall, eyes wide with the sudden knowledge that intention and impact are cousins who don't always speak. Emily's vision threaded the pieces, the arc of the bat, the second figure's weight on his back foot, the angle of the gravel-eyed rider's shoulders as he shifted his stance to make himself big enough to draw gravity and not heat. She moved. Her boots whispered across the tile. The coffee smell turned metallic in the air as adrenaline salted the room. "Easy," the gravel-eyed rider said without raising his voice. "You keep your hands in your future." He wasn't speaking to one man. He was speaking to the choice a man becomes right before he commits. The first intruder, military boots, gloved hands, shook his wrists like the blow had woken something he'd meant to keep asleep. He had a face made for not being remembered, the kind that disappears in lineups and lasts a day in a small town before it moves on. The second intruder, the one with nail-crowned bat, had the nervous smile of a copycat who wanted the splash without understanding the depth. "Move back," Nail Bat said to June, and to the boy at the counter, and to anyone whose legs would obey him. His voice was thinner than he hoped it would be. June didn't move. She took one step to her right until she stood half in front of the specials board the gravel-eyed rider had written on. Her hand held the coffee pot as if it contained a whole history of mornings, which it did. The boy was frozen into a new kind of stillness, the kind that's chosen. Randy found his bravado like a coat he wasn't sure he still liked and shrugged into it. "Let him through," he told his men, quick to play host now that stronger weather had arrived. "Your guests?" the gravel-eyed rider asked Randy mildly, eyes still on the alley. "You vouch?" Randy blinked. He had to translate the question into a language he spoke, consequence. That took a second. "They're with us," he finally said, which meant nothing to the new men and everything to the room. "Then you're responsible for where their hands go," the rider said. Nail Bat smirked. "Who made you sheriff?" No one, the rider said. And that's why I listen better. Emily's breath came slow. Wasp slept. The bracelet on her wrist clicked once as she flexed her fingers and eased her center of gravity down. She felt the outlaws behind her without turning, the line of them in the room, the hum of the engines outside like a pulse you could wear. No one postured. No one filled the doorway with brag. It was scarier this way, the quiet. The man with the military boots moved first, not with the bat but with the hand that wasn't holding it. He reached for the deadbolt above the back door like he owned the room and wanted to lock the rest of the world out of what he was about to do. The gravel-eyed rider stepped, a half step only, and the move redrew the geometry. Before you break that door, he said, ask yourself who taught you that breaking things makes you in charge. America did, the man said, almost proud, and there in his voice was the teacher's handwriting. Militia talk. Boardroom men who like to watch other men bruise. Podcasts that feed on grievances like carrion birds. Emily recognized the script. It had tried to draft her when she was 19 and alone on a road that didn't know her name yet. America taught me to fix my bike, she said. Different class, I guess. Nailbat snorted. Lady, you're outnumbered. Count again, she said gently, and this time he did. He counted the eyes that didn't look away, the shoulders that didn't hunch, the space that refused to give him an aisle to strut down. Outnumbered is a word that turns its coat depending on where you stand. From the front of the diner came the soft knock of knuckles on glass. 2 more riders had stayed outside, posted without being posted, and now one of them rapped a warning rhythm like a code transmitted underwater. The gravel-eyed rider flicked his chin, and one of the men at the door eased it open 2 inches to take a read. 2 more in the alley, he murmured. Pickup idling at the end, no plates. Randy licked his lips. He liked the way danger made him feel important until it came in carrying receipts. June, the gravel-eyed rider said without turning, you got a kettle? She understood before he finished. Sometimes leadership is just naming the tools in the room. Already boiling, she said, and set it on the back of the stove where steam rose like a white flag that meant something else. Nailbat stepped farther in, the nails catching light, throwing starbursts on the stainless steel. He swung low this time, not at wood but at the air beside Emily's knee, testing distance, trying to write fear in her muscles. She didn't give it to him. She let the bat pass and then she let her heel kiss the handle on its return, not a kick, an interruption. The bat jerked, glanced his thigh, and he yelped in surprise more than pain. Last page, the gravel-eyed rider said, as if turning a book. Set it down. Make me, Nailbat breathed, and his friend with the boots reached to pull the back door fully open, as if wider meant safer. That was when the road decided to speak in more than engine. From outside, a voice called in a tone that carried through sheet metal and history alike, deputy en route. Walk careful. The diner held a collective breath with the town. Law wasn't always friend or foe out here, it was a weather report. But even men who worship at the altar of their own imagined power understand what sirens do to theater. The pickup at the end of the alley revved, reversed, and stopped. A door opened. Someone cursed. Boots tried the door again. He was committed to the bit. He shoved. The gravel-eyed rider didn't move his feet. Brother, he said to the man at the counter nearest Emily, young, hair buzzed short, a scar splitting one eyebrow like a sentence that had changed its mind, bring me the salt. The kid blinked, then grinned and slid the shaker down the counter. The rider caught it one-handed without looking, palmed it, and held it up. Here's how this works, he said to the intruders, his voice still mild, like a teacher you don't want to disappoint. Every time you swing, she moves. Every time she moves, you lose ground. Try it 3 times and the shaker breaks your wrist on the 3rd. That's not a threat. That's a forecast. Forecast this, Nailbat growled, and he swung again, high this time, foolish because the ceiling didn't care for his ego. The nails scraped the tile, sparked, and the bat stuck a heartbeat in a groove where a fluorescent panel sat. The beat was all Emily needed. She stepped inside his arc, pressed her forearm to his bicep, shifted her hips, and the bat was in her other hand before his fingers could report the theft to his brain. It clattered to the tile. Someone's boot found it. Kicked it under the counter. The boy with the pencil set his foot on it like treasure he was saving for later and prayed later would come. Boots lunged, which is not a verb that serves well in tight quarters. Emily let him pass and showed him the absence where he believed there would be body. He met the stainless steel of the prep table with a full rib and made a sound like a deflating lie. "Stop," Randy said, and he wasn't sure who he meant, maybe himself. Sirens stitched the distance into approach. The pickup at the alley's mouth rolled forward as if deciding whether to act itself into a corner. A rider outside stepped into its lane and placed a palm on its hood. Not a strike. A boundary. The truck didn't test it. Boots pushed up, furious at gravity, and saw Emily's face for the first time without the blur of motion. He saw that she didn't hate him. That ruined him. Hatred would have excused him. Her clarity offered him a refund on his story, and he didn't want it. He went for his back pocket. Not a gun, though his hand wanted to think so, but a folding knife with a blade too long to be legal and too thin to be forgiving. It flashed once and then found the air because Emily's wrist found his and pressed it to the counter. "Think," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. "Or bleed." He looked down, saw the bone honesty of her grip, and did a math his friends had never taught him. He let the knife go. It rang on tile, a small sad bell. "Good," she said, and the gratitude in the word hit him harder than the counter had. From the front door, Breeze, and then the deputy himself, late 30s, uniform that had seen mud and a divorce and survived both. He took one step in, took in the room like a photograph loading left to right, and rested his hand near, not on, his holster. "What do we have?" he asked June 1st. It was a choice that changed the air. "Breakfast rush," she said, and set the kettle down. Steen whispered a story about restraint. The deputy's gaze moved to the gravel-eyed rider, and there was a nod that belonged to men who had been on both sides of mercy. "Travis," he said. "Evan," the rider returned, and the recognition there wasn't cozy, it was contractual. "We have met where asphalt and consequence intersect." Randy felt small suddenly, the way children do when the principal speaks calmly to their father in the doorway. "They broke in the back," he blurted, quickly offering blame that reached past the mirror and found him on its way back. Boots lifted his empty hands. Nailbat stared at the place on the floor where his weapon had gone like a man looking at a lake that used to be a field. "Anyone hurt?" Deputy Evan asked. "No," June and Emily answered together, and the harmony of it made the boy smile. "Good," Evan said. He looked at the chalkboard. "Read the rules." Something unclenched in his jaw. "All right. Here's how this is going to go." He spoke to the intruders. "You're going to step back outside and line up against the fence. You're going to put your weapons on the ground, and the one under the counter will join them. Then you're going to listen." "For what?" Nailbat muttered. "For the thing you haven't heard in so long you forgot what it sounds like." "What's that?" Nails tried for sarcasm and got lost. "Yourself," Evan said. "It shouldn't have worked. But rooms change when the person with the badge talks like a man who knows the difference between being obeyed and being respected." Boots moved first. Outside, riders stepped aside an inch at a time, creating a path that felt like a choice and a funnel both. The pickup at the alley's end shut off. As the men filed out, Randy hovered, unhappy being left behind by trouble he thought he invited. He looked at the Outlaws' cuts, trying to catalog them into a letter he could send to someone who would tell him he mattered. He caught Emily's eye by accident and looked away, because in there was a ledger he couldn't balance. Deputy Evan waited until the back hall cleared, then exhaled. "You got the room?" he asked Travis. "Until the coffee cools," Travis said. He glanced at Emily. "You speak?" She hadn't planned to. But the road had left her with a debt and she paid what she owed. She turned, leaned her hip against the counter, and let her voice find the register where truth doesn't need to shout. "My name is Emily Dupree," she said, as if the room hadn't already learned parts of it by ear. I ride because the road teaches me who I am without anyone else's handwriting on it. I came in here for eggs. I stayed because of a sign that shouldn't have been in a diner that deserves better. I don't ask to be safe where I go. I ask to be seen. That's all. She looked at June. Ma'am, your grits are perfect. June blinked fast and then laughed a little and cried a little because sometimes those live in the same house. Randy snorted, but the sound didn't stick. He was thinking about the sign and how the tape had peeled on one corner and left a smudge on the glass and how his thumbprint was probably in that smudge permanently. It was a joke, he said, and even he heard how small it sounded. Travis tapped the chalkboard with one knuckle. We wrote the rule, he said. You can write the life that follows it. Town won't like it, Randy muttered, but he didn't know which town he meant, the one outside or the one under his ribs. Maybe they will, the boy said, surprising himself, and blushing, and not taking it back. Deputy Evan called from the alley, voice steady with options. You three ready to have a day you remember for the right reason? Then quieter, to someone we couldn't see, put it down. You don't want that on your record or your sleep. No one in the diner breathed until we heard the clink of metal on gravel. The sound of a decision becoming a fact. June, Emily said, a thought arriving like a rider cresting a hill. You got a marker? She did. It lived under the register near the tape that had held up the bad sign. Emily took it, turned to the white ONLY seating paper still taped above the booth, and peeled it slowly, carefully, like removing a bandage from someone else's wound. She held the paper, weighed the impulse to tear, and didn't. She flipped it over. On the clean side she wrote in tall, even letters, everyone EATS. Then she taped it back up. No one clapped. Something better happened, you could feel the diner's bones approve. Outside, boots scuffed and the murmur of Evan's voice existed in the careful space between correction and invitation. The riders had relaxed but hadn't softened, they were still steel under leather. Travis accepted a mug of coffee from June and held it in both hands as if warming a prayer. He lifted the mug a fraction toward Emily like a toast she didn't need words for. I'll pay for the door, Emily said to June. No, June answered immediately. You paid. Then, quieter, thank you for not turning it into a movie. Emily smiled because that was the best compliment she'd ever gotten from a stranger. Real life's heavier, she said. It holds more. The ketchup stain on June's apron had dried into the shape of a heart someone had tried their best to draw. June looked down at it, shook her head, and laughed again. Deputy Evan came back in, the alley behind him tasting like dust and correction. All right, he said. We're going to talk with them a while. Get statements. You all can finish breakfast. He looked at the chalkboard again. That stays? June squared her shoulders. It stays. Randy opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. People will talk, he tried. They do, Evan said. But I listen. There's a difference. Travis set his mug down. We'll be at the counter, he told June. Paying. And tipping. June blushed like a teenager and then turned into a general. Grits, eggs, bacon, if there's a God, he likes bacon. Sit. I'll feed you all. The outlaws took their places the way a river takes its curve, not to own, to move. Emily slipped onto her stool. The boy reclaimed his pencil from the crack, grinning as if he'd fished a coin from a fountain. Randy hovered. He looked at Emily first, then at the chalkboard, then at his friend's empty booth. You okay? Emily asked him, not unkind. He shrugged, caught off guard by the gift of the question. I don't know what I am, he said. Hungry's a start, she offered. You eat, your brain turns back on. He laughed despite himself, an embarrassed bark that turned into something real. You're not what I thought. Me neither, she said, and that let him laugh again. June slid a plate in front of Emily. Eggs, a little softer than before, as if they'd learned something too. Toast that wore its brown like a tan earned outside instead of in a salon. Grits that still held the morning sun's patience. "Bless you," Emily said to June, and June blinked back wet. "Always," the woman whispered. The conversation at the counter grew in small circles: engines, asphalt, the way certain mountain turns teach you humility the way a grandmother does, with love and consequences. The riders didn't tell war stories. They told maintenance stories. You can learn a lot about a person by how they talk about chain lube. Randy wandered to the chalkboard and stared. The words looked back unafraid. He took the chalk. For a moment the room held its breath, suspecting vandalism, expecting retreat. He cleared his throat. "Under respect or remove yourself," he wrote, in letters that shook but held, "coffee on the house for first-timers." Then he stepped back like he'd put fire on a table. "Good rule," Travis said without looking at him. "Makes the room bigger." Evan came in again, this time with a paper for June to sign and a smile that hadn't been invited by much lately. "They'll go home," he said. "I'll walk by later." He looked at Emily. "You passing through?" "Always," she said. "Then I wish you good weather and easy tires," he said. "And fewer signs to peel." "Ah, but then what would I do with my mornings?" she said, and they both smiled like people who know mornings can be used for mending. The Outlaws ate and paid and overtipped because men like Travis understand what economies buy you more than breakfast. They left the room in better balance than they found it, which is a kind of roadwork you can do anywhere. Outside, the line of bikes caught the sun and threw it back up the mountain so it could try again. Riders mounted, settled, checked mirrors as if they weren't checking exits from habit. Engines started one at a time, not like thunder, more like a prayer chain, each voice following the one before until the sound became community. Before she swung her leg over, Emily walked to the boy and the stolen bat under the counter. She crouched. "You okay?" she asked. "I was brave," he said, clearly surprised to hear himself say it. "You were," she said. "Brave is just steady in a storm. You did it." She reached under the counter, dragged out the bat with the nails and carried it to Evan. "Property," she said. "Evidence," he corrected, and took it with 2 fingers like you'd take a hornet's nest. Randy lingered by the window, hand on the glass as if he could feel the echo of the morning in its cool. "Hey," he called as she reached her bike. "You come back." "If the coffee's hot," she said. "It will be," he said, and there he was, signing a contract with himself. Emily swung onto the saddle, the seat taking her shape like an old friend. She pulled on her helmet and fastened the strap with the ease of ritual. The bracelet on her wrist clicked once. The gravel-eyed rider rolled up beside her. "Ride with us," he said. "For a mile," she said. "Then I peel toward the high road." He nodded. "High road's not for tourists." "I live there," she said. They rolled. The town watched. Some eyes admired, some resented, some recalculated the perimeter of their world. Emily felt the staggered formation around her, the way riders become geometry together, each triangle a promise that if one falters the others have room to absorb the sway. They passed the Bait Ann wig store, she waved to the old woman dusting mannequins, and then the road shouldered into mountains. At the first turnout, Travis lifted 2 fingers and the pack slowed. He let her glide past and then drew parallel again. "You sure?" he asked without asking. "I am," she said. "But thank you." He smiled. "We're in the book if you need us." "Same page as before, just more dog-eared now." She laughed. "I know the page." Then she blipped the throttle, lifted a hand, and took the right fork when the pack flowed left, and it felt like a sentence that had been waiting for its comma found it. The high road rose with the mountain's breath. Pines stitched shade across the curve. The air changed temperature the way truth does when it reaches a room that deserves it. Emily rode at a speed that matched clarity. She let the morning replay once and then allowed it to tuck itself behind her like a jacket properly hung. She thought about the chalkboard and the boy and Randy's hand on the glass and the men in the alley who had been handed a different script and then put it down. She thought about June's coffee and the way the kettle had sounded like restraint, and she smiled into her visor. At a ridge overlook, she stopped. The world widened until even the bad places looked small because the good places took up so much space. She cut the engine, and in the sudden quiet she could hear, if she let herself, the echo of the diner, the bell over the door learning how to jingle loud again, the scrape of chairs, the page turn of blank mornings being written true. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from an unlisted number that wasn't unlisted to her. "Everything good?" it read. "Heard you stopped for eggs and equity." She grinned. The road's grapevine was faster than any network. She typed back, "All fed." Sign flipped. "Moving on." 3 dots, and then, "Proud of you, sister. See you at State Line in 2 days if your weather agrees." She pocketed the phone. The mountain air moved through her jacket, lifted the edges of old fears, aired them out like laundry done at last. She sat on the guardrail a minute and let the quiet sew her edges back up tighter than before. Then she swung on, started the bike, and pointed its nose toward the part of the day that hadn't been invented yet. Miles later, the sky shouldered into afternoon. She passed a hand-painted sign for a church rummage sale, a high school marquee that read "Be kind, it's free," a produce stand with peaches whose fuzz glowed. She pulled in for a bottle of water and bought a bag of peaches she didn't need because the woman selling them had eyes like June's and she wanted the world to match. "Where you headed?" the woman asked. "Where the road is honest," Emily said, "because that's the only true answer." Back in the saddle, she felt her center settle again into that place where people's unfinished homework can't reach. She rode through one of those tunnels carved from rock, where the world becomes wind and echo in self. In the bunker of that sound she heard the road say what it always says to the ones who listen: keep going. Keep making rooms bigger. Keep leaving towns better than you found them. Near the state line, clouds massed like a promise. She zipped her jacket higher and laughed into the first rain that came down. It tasted like relief. The drops hit her visor and slid off clean. The tires sang. The bracelet clicked. The bike became the only instrument playing a melody she had spent years learning by ear. Behind her, in a diner at the base of the mountains, June flipped the specials board to a fresh day and wrote in chalk that didn't tremble, "All are fed." She left the old paper sign up, flipped to the side that read "Everyone EATS," not as a warning but as a receipt. The boy brought in a stack of fresh menus and slid one down the counter to Randy, who read it like a person reading a letter from himself written by a better day. Deputy Evan walked in at closing and poured himself a coffee he paid for, left exact change on the counter, and sat a minute without taking up more space than his body needed. He asked June how the afternoon had gone. "Quieter," she said. "Like the room is breathing different." "Good," he said. "Keep the chalk. Write us steady." Outside, the pickup with no plates drove by slow and didn't stop. No one waved. Sometimes command is surrender with manners. 2 days later at the state line, the Outlaws were there, just like the text said they'd be, lined up under a sky that had learned its manners again. Travis handed Emily a paper bag. Inside, a patch not for a cut but for a heart, a small stitched black winged skull with script beneath it that read, in stitches tight as promise, "You belong where you stand." She carried it in her pocket like a coin that fit every vending machine of doubt. She rode with them for 100 miles because sometimes family is a formation more than a bloodline. They turned off toward another town's problem. She kept straight because the horizon had sent her an invitation with her name spelled right. As evening stretched, she found a motel with a vacancy sign that buzzed like the guitar in a band that never learned to tune but still learned to play together. She parked under the eave and listened to the rain find rhythm on the metal, and for a moment the world felt exactly sized. She texted June a photo of the peaches lined on the motel AC unit to ripen. June sent back a photo of the chalkboard with a new line, "Don't be a jerk. It's cheaper to be kind." A heart and ketchup, still. Emily laughed and took off her boots and lay back on the bedspread that wanted very much to be forgiven. She let the day play one more time and then surrendered it to the file drawer where good work goes. She slept the way travelers do when the map and the miles agree. Morning came in on the smell of wet asphalt and diesel. She packed, paid, and left a peach and a thank you note for the motel clerk who had given her an extra towel without making it feel like a favor. She checked her tires, checked her chain, checked the sender she trusted more than either. On the way out of town, a diner sat at a bend, new to her, old to itself. She slowed. Through the window she saw a hand-lettered sign over the door that read, "Eat like you're worth it." She smiled and rolled on, because she was. Because she did. Ahead, the road opened like a throat about to sing. She sang with it in the way riders do, with throttle and line, with eyes that measure and forgive. She thought of the boy's quiet bravery, of Randy's chalk-shaky letters, of June's heart-shaped stain, of Travis's gravel gaze measuring men into better shape, of Evan's voice setting a room to rights without breaking anything that didn't need breaking. She breathed, long and easy. The bracelet clicked once. And somewhere, in a town that had memorized its worst habits too well, a bell over a diner door jingled loud again, unafraid, announcing each person who crossed under it as if the threshold itself had learned a new language and wanted to say every name right. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.